they don't make them like they used to. It's certainly a saying you could apply to the RTS genre, but the developers of this new classic RTS have aimed to do just that, bringing back all your millennial nostalgia for big old base building, massive army producing, and for all-out warfare, smashing your big army into the other guy's big army, eventually pushing into his base and laughing heartily as you burn it to the ground. This, my friend, is Tempest Rising. Allow me to tell you a little bit about this game, and yes, this is a sponsored video, so thanks to 3D Realms for that. Let's go! So the demo I got to play had two factions, as it will at launch, the Global Defense Force and the Tempest Dynasty, giving the usual good guy, bad guy vibes. Now, while there is a campaign for each of those, in this demo it's only the skirmish mode, multiplayer or just versus bots. And firstly, some of the main mechanics, there is of course a resource to be harvested like any good old classic RTS. This is your money, your currency that you buy everything with, such as your buildings which all progress and unlock each other, so you got to figure out your build order. Defenses, namely walls and turrets, maybe some repair buildings. Walls is especially a nice touch. It's always nice to build an actual proper base with walls. And then there's infantry, the staple of any good army, of course. Units can be anti-infantry, anti-vehicle, anti-air. There are some specialists that can come with unique uses as well. And then it's the same for vehicles, anti-infantry, anti-air, anti-Susan, whatever, aerial vehicles as well. So a lot of different options that you can build around. Power is another resource you'll have to manage. Got to make sure you got enough power for all your buildings and such. This nicely opens the way for one of my favorite early game tactics, to take out the enemy's power sources and shut down half their base for a little bit. There's also these things called doctrines, which is like a little tech tree that you can research to unlock upgrades for your faction in various ways. They're in 3 columns focusing towards a different kind of playstyle, but you can unlock them in different orders as you wish. You don't have to stick to one column or anything, so you can figure out some research to support your playstyle. There's also unique faction abilities as well that you can call down at any time. They just have a cooldown and you have to pay for them. These can be pretty powerful in the right moment, whether you're in a dire situation or you're looking to push on the enemy hard. This is the airstrike one here for the GDF. This is great for damaging buildings, so you can take them out a little bit quicker when you push the enemy's base, for example. And that is, of course, the main objective. At least in these skirmishes, you can either have it so you have to just destroy the enemy's main building in their base, or all of their buildings, or all of their buildings and all of their units. So different ways to set up the skirmish, but overall it is your classic RTS systems in play here as the base underlying core of the game. But I think what really needs to shine in any RTS is a real difference between the factions, so that they don't just feel like you're playing the same thing in a different color. And that's what this game does a really good job of, so let me spout off some of the differences between the two factions and how they play, because they do feel quite different from each other. Firstly, with how buildings are constructed for the GDF. Whenever I'm playing the GDF, by the way, you'll notice the blue UI and the blue units, so just keep that in mind. But with the buildings, you can see when I put down a building, it turns into a little construction yard and gradually builds itself with the money, which is fine generally, but if enemies come along and attack that building, it will get destroyed before it's built. Whereas the Dynasty with the red UI, and I've chosen green for the color of my army, but their buildings, once you click them, they're kind of built in the menu. You can see this barracks building is kind of on a timer as it builds, but it's not actually placed down anywhere in the world yet. But when it's ready, it'll come up, and as you'll see, it'll say ready. I place it down, and then it's instantly built on the spot. The upside of this is that your buildings aren't vulnerable while they're being built, and they're just up straight away, especially handy for turrets. But you can only construct one building at a time, and you can't do another one until you've placed the previous one. So advantages and disadvantages for both ways of building. Refineries work differently as well. For the GDF, you have this building where your little bot goes out and harvests and then comes back and drops it in. It's one single bot that can fill up loads, and this building can be upgraded to passively generate income, which is very handy because when a resource runs out in an area, this building would become useless, but with that passive income, still handy. Now for the Dynasty, they don't have a refinery building, but rather a refinery vehicle, which is very handy because you can set it down and pick it up and move somewhere else, so when the resource runs out, you can just move it to a new patch. It also has 4 smaller bots rather than one big one, which makes them easier to take out, which could be good for a little early game strategy to slow down the enemy's resources. For the GDF, they have this unique currency Intel. It doesn't have a tooltip, so I'm not entirely sure how it's generated. It goes up passively, but I feel like there's a way to make it go up faster as well. You need this for pretty much everything, constructing buildings, units, abilities. The GDF also have this marked system. You can see on this comms officer, it says marks enemies with his attack. And then for this other unit, the drone mauler, it says large damage bonus when attacking marked targets. So a damage boost system there if you can synergize it. There is different ways to mark enemies and different units that can benefit from it. The GDF also have a vehicle repair bay building, so they can quickly repair vehicles, something the Dynasty doesn't have. But what the Dynasty does have is these different plans for their main building. The logistics plan, this can increase your economy, good for early game. The Marshall plan, good if you're on the offensive. And the security plan, good if you're on the defensive. So you can have those active at any time, just costs you a little bit of power, so a nice little boost from those. The Dynasty can also put their power buildings into distribution mode, which will basically overcharge any nearby buildings, making them work faster. In this case, I'm using it on my infantry building to produce my infantry faster. Very good in a tight situation, although it does damage the building. You can repair it with an engineer at the same time though. Speaking of engineers, the GDF-1 can deploy a guard tower, very good for extra line of sight or just watching over an area. You can chuck a few men in there as well, just to make it a little more useful. The Dynasty engineer can't build guard towers, but he can lay mines, also very handy. As for repairs and healing, the GDF have a vehicle that can drop a beacon that repairs any nearby vehicles. You can see that's the yellow circle. And then they also have a medic infantry who can similarly drop a little beacon that will heal infantry. That's the green circle there. So GDF very good at healing on the go with these two. And for the Dynasty, they have a specialist which will constantly emit a repairing aura, but it's quite small, as you can see, the yellow circle. For healing infantry, they can upgrade their barracks building to be able to heal anything nearby, which is handy when they're at base. And when they're away from base, one of their unique faction abilities is to drop a little healing beacon. So you won't be able to use it quite as often as the GDF can use their healing from a medic, but a medic's more easily killed than this healing building. And then, of course, there's the different units for both sides, which can make a big difference to how they play. The Dynasty, for example, have a lot of fire going on. These igniters, a flamethrower infantry. There's also a flamethrower tank and a flamethrower turret. These, of course, very good up close, but unable to do anything at range. The GDF with some slightly more unconventional units, like the drone operators. That's the equivalent of the Dynasty's missile unit, so anti-vehicle unit. They also have the riot troopers, so a melee-only unit, although they can get EMP grenades against vehicles. And then there's the specialists for both sides who bring all sorts to the table, loads of different kinds of abilities that you could work around or build around and make good use of. And these are kind of like heroes in many other games, but they're not OP like some heroes are. They have powerful abilities like this that can be useful, but they can still die quite easily if they're not careful. So there's a bunch of the differences between the two factions, and there is loads more as well, but that's just some that I've noticed so far. And yeah, it really does do a good job of making the two factions feel quite different from each other, which opens the way for one of the most fun parts of these kind of games, coming up with different tactics, strategies, and builds to destroy your enemies with. For example, maybe you want to come out with a bunch of riot shield boys to get up close in melee, then you got some drone operators to help deal with vehicles, as well as a whole scheisse ton of tanks. Or maybe you want a front line of flamer tanks for dealing with the enemy infantry, while supported by a whole load of missile units taking out all the vehicles and buildings. Not to mention these long-range missile tanks here as well, so the enemy can barely touch half our stuff past the flamer tanks. Or maybe you want to sneak a sniper up to the enemy base who will go invisible when he sits still, and he can make sure there's nothing in the way of all your aerial transports coming to drop off a whole scheisse ton of infantry to hit the enemy base hard before they even know what the hell's happening. So there's just endless tactics and strategies you can come up with all the different units and doctrines and army abilities. There's a lot of fun to be had playing both factions in all different ways. The armies can also be pretty damn huge as well. This army here you're seeing is only about half my population cap. Well, what does a full population cap look like? Well, this, a pretty damn huge army, resulting in undoubtedly some pretty crazy battles, especially if there's 4 players. A few other nice little things. There are these fortifications around the map that you can man. You could put up to 10 men in the bigger ones, so they can actually be quite formidable if you fill them up. I've put 1 man in a whole bunch of them here across the map, so I've got line of sight across the whole map so I can see what the enemy's up to. So different tactical ways you could make use of those. You can set patrols as well. If you want a bunch of units to defend an area, they'll go back and forth between 2 points. Very helpful. There's nice attention to detail as well. Even when soldiers die, it looks natural when they fall down. Also, they are covered in blood and there's blood on the ground, and it all looks relatively natural without looking over the top. Another nice little feature is that if you're a tank or some other kind of vehicle, you can actually just run over infantry. Literally, no matter how tough they are, just squish the bastards. The Dynasty even have this weird ball unit that can actually run over vehicles as well. So roll on the Dynasty ball meta, pun intended. So yeah, just a lot of crazy stuff, and it just all feels like there's a lot of love that's gone into this game with that attention to detail, but also just in everything. You can see it looking at the game. It's visually fantastic. The environments, the buildings, the vehicles, the units, the animations and the combat, the fire. It all looks heckin' fantastic, and as an RTS should in 2025. Also cool points for the metal soundtrack. So overall, Tempest Rising is a damn solid classic RTS. Is it going to redefine the RTS genre and change the world? No, but it's not trying to do that. It's aiming to be something like good old classic Command and Conquer, but it does feel like there's those little modern innovations that add a nice bit of detail, making for a fresh experience. But hey, don't take my word for it. You can go and check out the game for yourself right now for free on Steam. There is a demo as part of the Strategy Game Fest that's going on right now until the 3rd of February. There's also a link in the description if you just want to check the game out before trying it. The game comes out in April as well, so not too long to wait. I'll most definitely be giving the campaigns a run through and maybe a little bit of skirmish or multiplayer as well. But there we go. I hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the future.